Thank you, councillors. If I could please ask for an elected member to move a motion that we resume standing orders. Thank you, Councillor Hook, and seconded by Councillor Moses. I'll put that motion. All in favour? Against? Declare that motion carried. Councillors, just to give you a confirmation that the ballot papers of the election that we just held have been destroyed. And with your indulgence, councillors, just for a few moments, if I could just make a really quick address before we continue on with the agenda. Firstly, I'd like to say I'm very humbled to have your support to continue on in the mayoral position that I've held since 2016 and now will till September 2023. I've got to say, councillors, as a group of new body, a group of elected members by the Gunnedah community from the 4th of December election that was held, we've got a big responsibility ahead of ourselves. There is an expectation from our community that we will have strong and effective representation of the collective interests of our community. We can never lose sight of that. We have an expectation from our community that we will advocate to the strongest of our ability to state and Commonwealth government and any other organisation for the needs of this community, as we have in the past. And I know everyone in this room who brings certain skills and ability will continue to do on behalf of this great community of the Gunnedah Shire that we have. I really do look forward to it. I'm excited about what's ahead, of what we know what's ahead. We have a strong list of projects that we have funding for that will continue to go on and deliver in the short term. We have objectives through our operational and delivery plan of things we still have agreed to our community that we will deliver and to the best of our ability, but there are things that we don't know that we will face as a council in this next term. Things like COVID in this last term that we will need to react to. And as a collegiate strong body of councillors for the Gunnedah Shire Council, I'm sure we can do that effectively. So as I said, once again, I'm very humbled to be the mayor and I look forward to the term ahead. Thank you. We're going to move on now to back to our agenda, and we have several items under the Directorate of Corporate and Community Services reports. The first one is in relation to countback of elections, and I'm going to ask our Director of Corporate and Community Services, Mr. Foreman, to detail a recommendation, councillors, that you have before you. Sorry, I've moved ahead too quickly. I'm going to reverse back. Not a good start, is it, for a new council? Our next item on the agenda is declarations of interest. So I must ask if there are any declarations of interest in relation to the items on the agenda. Received nothing in writing. I'll ask a second time, are there any declarations in relation to the... There's not. So we'll move ahead. There are no representations from the community. And now we'll go on to our Corporate and Community Services reports. And as I said, the first report is countback of elections, and I'll hand over to Mr. Foreman to detail the recommendation.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, the first item deals with the option for council to take up to fill a casual vacancy that occurs in the first 18 months of a council term by countback rather than by election. If council is of a mind to take up this option, it has to be done at this meeting, the first meeting of a new council, and the recommendation is outlined in the report in support of council taking up that option.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I'll now call for an elected member to move that motion. Thank you, or recommendation. Councillor Luke has moved the recommendation and Councillor Hook has seconded the recommendation, which has now become the motion. Councillor Luke, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do believe that this is a good idea for us to undertake. The cost of by-elections is quite high, and I think with such a short term of council and limiting the time to 18 months, it is a very good idea to do the countback situation, which will has the opportunity to save council funds. Thank you.
I'll now call for an elected member who'd like to speak against this motion or ask a further question of the officer. Councillor Hook, as a seconder to the motion, do you wish to speak?
Mr. Mayor, I think Councillor Luke has covered it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. If there are no further questions, then I might put the motion. All in favour of the motion? That's unanimously supported, therefore it's carried. We'll now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is delegations of authority, and I'll hand back to Mr. Foreman to detail the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the first of a number of housekeeping items on the agenda today. This puts in place the delegations of authority for the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor, the General Manager, the Planning and Environment Committee and the GOHA Clinical Governance Committee, largely in line with what they were during the last term of Council.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I now call for elected member to move the recommendation. Thank you. Councillor Fuller has moved. And Councillor MacArthur has seconded that motion. Councillor Fuller, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No thanks, Mr Mayor.
We have an elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against this motion. Councillor MacArthur, as the seconder of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, Mr Mayor.
If there's no discussion or debate, then councillors, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Next item on the agenda, councillors, is item 8.3, which is the Acting General Manager. We have a recommendation in 3 parts, and I'll hand to Mr. Foreman to detail that recommendation to you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Following the adoption of the delegations, it's recommended that Council adopt a resolution that would allow the members of the executive team to act in the position of General Manager should the General Manager be unavailable or unable to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. Again, I'll call an elected member to move the recommendation becomes a motion. Thank you, Councillor Hook. And seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Hook, as the mover, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
I'll call for an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question. Councillor Moses, as the seconder, would you like to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Well then, councillors, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declare that motion carried. Item 8.4, councillors, is the next item on the agenda, and that is meeting dates for the ordinary meeting to December 2022. And I'll hand to Mr. Foreman to detail the item of the recommendation in 3 parts and talk about what that schedule looks like. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's recommended that the information be received and noted and that the proposed meeting schedule until December 2022 be endorsed, and that the ordinary meetings of the Gunnedah Shire Council continue to be held on the 3rd Wednesday of each month commencing at 4:30 with the exception of August as detailed in the report, and that the Planning, Environment and Development Committees continue to be held on the 1st Wednesday of each month commencing at 4 o'clock.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I call for elected member to move that recommendation becomes the motion. Thank you, Councillor Luke, seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Luke, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak to it?
I'm quite happy with those dates, Mr Mayor, but I don't know if any other members are, but I'm quite happy.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Moses, as the second of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
There's no further debate then, councillors. I'll put that motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. If it's going to be this easy all the way through this term, it's going to be great. Well, we'll move right along. The next item on the agenda is the Australia Day and Scholarship Working Fund groups. Councillors, before I hand to the Director of Corporate and Community Services, you will note in the recommendation that there is the first part of the recommendation. There is an opportunity for 3 councillors to become the elected members. So I would now like to call for nominations for those 3 positions. Councillor Councillor Fuller.
Australia Day, I'll nominate Councillor Hook.
Councillor Hook, would you like to accept that nomination?
I shall, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I'll call for, there are 2 further positions. I'll call for further nominations.
Councillor MacArthur.
Councillor Luke has nominated Councillor MacArthur. Councillor MacArthur, would you like to accept the nomination?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Luke.
I'll call for further nominations. Councillor
Fuller, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Fuller, you've been nominated for the position. Would you like to accept that? Thank you, Councillor Fuller. You have accepted that nomination. Councillors, we have 3. I'll now call for, are there any further nominations for the position? I'll call a second time for any further nominations. If it's not contested, those 3 councillors will be the councillors who will be appointed to the Australia Day Working Group. Okay, thank you. We have our 3 councillors who will be nominated. And now I'll hand to Mr Foreman to detail the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors be aware that at the next ordinary meeting we will consider the remainder of the delegates and make appointments. But given the work of the Australia Day Committee is going to happen before the February meeting and that the assessment of the Scholarship Fund Working Group nominations is currently underway, the recommendation is that the 3 councillors be appointed to the Australia Day Working Group, and that community representation on the Gunnedah Community Scholarship Fund Working Group be increased to include the appointment of Mrs Gay Swain.
Thank you, Mr Foreman. Councillor Fuller, you'd like to move that recommendation?
I'm happy to move that recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. And
I'd also like to nominate Councillor Huddle for the scholarship.
Councillor Fuller, I believe in the February meeting we'll be reviewing all of the membership in relation to the elected members on working groups and committees. So Councillor Fuller, you have moved that recommendation that Councillor Swain be added to that Mrs Swain be added to that working group. I must clarify that, ex-Councillor Swain. I'll now call for a seconder. Councillor Hook? You've seconded the motion?
Yes, Mr Mayor, but I also have a question, if I may. Just for the record, I presume that Mrs Swain does accept this position?
I'll refer to Mr Foreman if he's had that conversation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, Mrs Swain's indicated to me that she would like to see out this round of assessments and finish the work she started with the Scholarship Fund, if Council is amenable to that.
Councillor Fuller, as a move of the motion, do you wish to speak to it?
No, Mr Mayor, I think I'd like to thank Mrs Swain for the work that she's put in over many, many years. So I would like to congratulate her, and I'm very pleased that she's able to be back on that committee. Thank you.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Hook, as the seconder of the motion, do you wish to speak?
Nothing further to add, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Council, is there any further questions or comments before I put this motion? Be the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? It's unanimously supported. And councillors, that is the last item on our agenda for the extraordinary meeting of January. Thank you for your participation, your attendance, and as I said, I am very humbled to have your support as your mayor for the until the September 2023 period, and I look forward to all of our achievements in the future. I'll declare the meeting closed at 5:12. Thank you.